Ah, there we go. Sound. I wasn't sure I had the sound for a moment. And welcome to Understanding Photography with Kim Ayres, episode 206. So, today we're going to be talking about the notion of consent in photography. I mean, I'm kind of talking here about the legal thing that's out there if you're doing street photography and things like that, but also the notion of power relationships. What does that mean? Does the person who's holding the camera have power over the person who's being photographed? And if so, is there a duty of responsibility towards that? This is the idea that I really want to explore. It's something we've not really talked that much about. There's one area where we touched on it in passing, but that's really what we're on about today. But meanwhile, this is live. If you happen to be watching live anyway, leave a comment. Let me know you're here. Let me know where you're from. Let me know what the weather's like, and we can get the chat started. Let's make a start. So yes, welcome. I can see there's a few people in already, so let's say a quick few hellos. Robert from Texas says, howdy all from an excruciatingly hot Texas. Excruciatingly hot Texas. Yeah, well, not exactly excruciatingly hot here in Castle Douglas, has to be said. It's about 16 degrees Celsius, overcast. It's not actually raining, but it does feel like it could at any moment. Other Robert Schaefer says, good morning from a trying to wake up in Texas. Of course, yeah, I mean, there's a 5 or 6 hour time difference between here and there, I think. So, yeah, we're about 9 o'clock in the morning there. So having a bit of a lie-in on a Sunday morning. April says, greetings all from a stormy Long Island, New York. Oh, stormy. I kind of want to, yeah. Is that the kind of stormy where you want to get out with the camera, or the kind of stormy where you just want to sit at home and batten down the hatches? Maggie says, hello everyone from a cool grey and not very summery here in southwest Scotland. Janet says, hi from a hot Mississauga, sunny now but expecting more rain this afternoon. Nadia says, hi everyone, first one of a few weeks where I'm actually at home and not in the car losing the signal, trying to watch the podcast. Watching it in comfort, that's good. Susan says, hello from Kakubri, a bit dull and grey here. Nick's joined us, says hello from the West Country. John says, good day all from Columbus, Ohio. Meg says, hello everyone. Sandra says, hi everyone from a warm and sunny Birmingham. Oh, and Katie has joined us from a pretty cool Melbourne. Welcome, Katie. So glad to go. Oh, what's the time difference in... tell me what the time is over there in Melbourne there, Katie, because I know that's going to be... Oh, it must be pretty late for you. You must be staying up quite late to join us from there. Excellent. So, let's have a little talk then about the notion of... Actually, I'll tell you what, before we get onto that, quick Smug Points update. Okay, so Smug Points. Yes, there's been a general accumulation of Smug Points. And Smug Points are one of these things which are there for anybody who's not sure, or for Katie if you've been missed out for a little while. Smug Points are, you get Smug Points for your contributions to the podcast. So by just turning up and saying hello and letting me know you're here, you automatically get 5 Smug Points, and I can put you onto the Smug Points leaderboard. If you contribute images for critique, for feedback, you get 25 Smug Points. If you contribute to the challenges, so this next week we've got the minimalism challenge. We talking about that at the end of the podcast. You get 10 points for that. There's bonus points to be had all through, and there's an accumulation. And so far, what we have here on the accumulated, heading the leaderboard for August is VG in India, who is currently on 30 Smug Points for August, where everyone else is on about either 5 or 10. And heading up the third quarter, so we've also got Smug Points for a quarterly thing going on here. Robert Gullick is currently in the lead with 100, VG's following with 90, April with 70, and Sandra and Janet both on 65. So everything to play for that, and with the minimalism challenge coming up next week, still a lot of room for manoeuvre as to who might win the August Smug Points accumulation. Right, what have we got here? Katie said, where are we? Midnight. Oh gosh, midnight there, yes. But, well, great that you stayed up to join us, Katie. VG's joined us and says, good evening from Chennai. Oh, I think it's about 7:30 in the evening there. And there's a few people saying hi to Katie as well. So, what are we going to do? Let's make a start. So, this notion of then consent in photography and power relationships. And where am I going with this? What do I mean by this? So largely, really, what this comes out of is kind of the notion of street photography as such. That notion, or photographing out in public places, whether it's street, whether it's events, festivals, but that notion of you're there, you've got the camera, you're wandering around taking photos. Does it matter whether the person you're photographing wants you to photograph them or not? What's the legal status of that? What's the moral status of that? Is it just all about you being in your rights, within your rights? Is there sometimes, do you have to watch a sense of entitlement? So this is kind of what I want to talk about today. And so I'm going to talk you through a few different things. A couple of people have sent me their thoughts on it. And a particular experience I had, which is what sort of triggered all this off. And so I really kind of this is kind of what I want to explore. Okay, so I'll tell you what, let's just let's throw up a couple of photos just for a starting point here, just to kind of, because let's face it, supposing you've gone off, supposing you happen to be walking along and you saw these guys in their zebra onesies. I mean, of course, if you've got your camera with you, you would immediately whip out the camera, take a photo. Do you worry about whether they're consenting to having their photograph taken? Probably not. Okay, they're prepared to walk around. Now, I will just say, this isn't Castle Douglas High Street. This was at a festival, a music festival. It's actually, I think it was the UPwKA Festival, was about 10 years ago or thereabouts in southwest Scotland. And festivals tend to be great places where you wander around with your camera, you're firing off photos, and nobody really cares. Okay, now when you're in the street, it's slightly different. People can kind of look at you with a bit of suspicion. Generally speaking, when you're at a kind of big music festival, everybody's got cameras. There's people shooting all over the place, and there's people who are just dressing up and having fun, and nobody's really noticing, nobody's caring. So, a little bit of fun. You look around, you're standing in the crowd, a couple of people dressed like the Blues Brothers. Again, a bit of fun. You kind of, you shoot, you're there with your camera, you're looking for people who look interesting, but maybe you're also sort of practicing other things like your notions of composition, rules of thirds, leading lines, depth of focus, all these kind of things that you're kind of playing around. How do you get the main narrative to stand out in the photo? Perhaps you kind of find, I mean, in this case, I love this guy with a cigar. But actually, although out of focus, the couple behind him are clearly smiling at me. They don't mind me taking the photo. They're maybe finding it quite amusing. I go on, I turn the camera around. You've got all these women here wearing these kind of glow stick apparel. And as soon as they see the camera, kind of like a cheer goes up almost, and it's like, yay, take a look at us. And in fact, sometimes what I tended to find is when I was going around the festival and what have you, and especially if I had my big camera on me, people would sometimes stop me and say, oi, over here, take a photo of us, because they thought I was some kind of press photographer, and whatever photo I took would end up in the local newspaper. And, here's classic case, they literally stopped me and told me I had to take their photograph. I felt kind of a bit intimidated. I've got this big zoom lens on. I can't stand back far enough to actually fit them all in. There's about half a dozen of them here. I've only got 4 in. You can just about see the edge of somebody's ice cream or something or other over in this left-hand corner. And over here, just somebody getting, come back. Over here on the right, somebody just squeezing out. So this was a point whereby, I was going to cause offence if I didn't take the photograph. Okay. And then sometimes you're just kind of looking around where you're recording an event. So, here's the cue for the Portaloos, it's just this sort of shot where you go, oh my God, look at the length of that. Everybody, how many people actually can make it that far before there's some kind of accident? And it's a documentary. Am I going to worry about going off and getting the consent of every single person in that photo? Absolutely not. It's not about that. You would be hard struck. You'd have to go in and really look to see if you could find an individual that you recognised. Am I humiliating anybody? No, absolutely not. This is documentary. So sometimes these kind of street photos are a sort of mix of documentary and just, and a bit of fun. And sometimes, like I say, people want you to take that photo. You're trying to get a sense of the atmosphere. You're practicing out your street photography style, bits and pieces. Any harm done? Not really. Okay. Then we sort of moved. I've talked before once before about a group of photographers. We went to Morocco a few years back, and we ended up at this marketplace, and again, good street photography kind of area to do. I've got my camera, I've got a wide angle lens sitting on it, and you see people, so here we've got onions and carrots and Swedes and what have you, and or is it turnips? Got people moving around. This isn't Castle Douglas, okay? So there's something other. There's something a bit exotic. There's something a bit. Oh, we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto. About it. So that becomes a kind of an interesting aspect of travel photography. But then so I'm getting another sense here of the market. But one of the things I took a couple of photos, and then I noticed that actually there's people staring back at me, not looking particularly happy. This guy in particular, he's sort of, who are you with the camera? And suddenly, I sort of got this sort of feeling of tourist, perhaps privileged European tourist in this place. And what kind of, am I just walking around with a sort of sense of entitlement here, that it's okay for me? And in fact, shortly after this, I tried another photo with somebody else who actually waved his hand up at me and was clearly not happy about having his photo taken. I put the camera down. However, for all that you're charging about, there was a bunch of little kids running about. Somebody pulled out their camera, was taking some photos, and these kids came up and immediately start posing for it. Okay, you can see one of the other photographers in the group, he's dropped his camera down to kind of get down at their head height. And these kids were completely up for coming, hey, photograph us, photograph us, photograph us, and then asking for money for being photographed. And suddenly you realise there's a whole different kind of power dynamic relationship going on. And why are they doing that? Because this is actually quite commonplace. You get for tourists to come in, then tourists are people that you could, they're going to stick your camera in your face, but hey, maybe you can make money out of them. So suddenly the whole thing doesn't necessarily become quite as comfortable as I was hoping it would be. So it's not necessarily straightforward. That you can pull out your camera, but what about the people on the other side of it? Where is the kind of consent coming in? Where's the power relationship? And where's the sense of, are you, do you have a sense of entitlement? Are you treating the subject as an object? And so this is kind of, okay, I can see a couple of other comments coming in. Where are we? Oh, Katie says, you know me, I'm a night owl anyway. It's early for her. That's fine. Glad you could make it. And she's enjoying the idea of this topic. So Robert Gallick says, at least in America, the First Amendment allows people to photograph in public. There is no expectation of privacy in public. Not sure about European countries. Nor other countries for that matter. April says, some of them expect it and some don't mind being photographed, especially if you're on a tour. Robert says, I love the fact the kids are throwing up gang signs. Nick says, if you happen to make eye contact with the person or persons, you should at least point to your camera and gesture for consent. Janet says, I read that in Quebec, you're not allowed to publish photos of people without consent, at least as of 2010. Robert Schaefer says he believes the same thing as other Robert. Oh, Marilyn's joined us all from a hot Colorado. Welcome, Marilyn. Okay, so I'll tell you what. Then let's just do a quick bit about what's the legal side then of photographing people in public. Now, I can't say that this is true for all places in all worlds. What I can tell you is what it is for Britain, for the UK. And then I think it's fairly similar for quite a few other countries, but not all. And it may well be, say in Quebec, there could be particular, or there could be particular states. So here in the UK, basically, if you are on public land, public property, public ground, so if you're out in the street, in a public park or something like that, there is nothing illegal in photographing anybody else that you can see. Okay, I think you can even photograph into private grounds as long as you are on public ground. Okay, so legally nobody can stop you. So if you see a bunch of kids playing in the park, you can take photos of the kids in the park. If you see a homeless person sitting on the street, you can take a photograph of them. If you see a couple just trying to be quiet and on their own and have their own little space, you can still go up and stick your camera in their face. Now, whether they consider the idea that you're invading their space and it starts an argument, that's another thing. But legally, you are within your rights. Now, if you are on private property, then you have to make sure that you have the permission of the land or the property owner. Now, that's not necessarily always quite so obvious because, for example, if you are in a shopping mall or even a shopping mall car park, that is, by rights, the ownership is not public land. It's owned by whatever company happens to own the shopping mall and the car park, right? So if you might think that, well, I was out in the car park, I saw this woman pushing a trolley and she was wearing a unicorn onesie and I thought that was really funny and I take the photo. Now, if the security guards come up to you and say, you can't do that here, you've got to put your camera away, they are actually within their rights to do it. Now, what they can't do is if you're actually on public ground, if you're out on the pavement, the sidewalk, out with the shopping mall, and take a photo of somebody pushing the onesie, wearing the unicorn onesie, pushing the trolley, then security guards can't do anything about it. So that's your legal. Now, that's what it is in the UK. I get the feeling it's probably similar in many parts of the US and many parts of Europe. But you do have to check this because it's not necessarily true in all countries of the world. So if you are planning on travelling somewhere, always worth doing a quick Google before you leave to find out what the legal status is. Shouldn't be too hard to find. Now, having said that, there's another legal aspect of photography, which is about where consent comes in, which is about how you then use that photo. Because if you take a photo of somebody and then imply something about that photo, like the way they happen to be voting or a product they might happen to be endorsing, and you haven't got their permission, then they potentially can sue you for that. So let's say, for example, I personally boycott Nestle products. I boycott Nestle products because of information that I've been given over the years about the way, specifically, their aggressive way of promoting milk products favouring breastfeeding to babies in third world countries or developing nations. Okay, and plus a whole great long list of other things which Nestle have done, which have made me say that where I'm going to spend my money, I'm going to make the choice of not putting it into the hands of that particular company. Now, you can argue with me, debate with me about whether the rights and wrongs of everything that I buy, that's fine. That's not the point of this question, this point. The point that I'm trying to make here is that I personally have made a point of boycotting Nestle products. Now, supposing somebody hands me a jar of Nescafe, Nestle product, one of their big brands, and I go, oh, no, not happy with that, and I pass it back to them. Or I'm holding on to it while I'm explaining to somebody about why I don't drink their coffee. But somebody else then photographs me holding that jar of coffee, and then they think that's such a great photograph, we're now going to use it for an ad campaign to promote Nescafe and to promote Nestle products. And yet, so if that then went out, that would be a kind of defamation. That would be a slander because I actually boycott this product. And now that could ruin my reputation and make me seem like a hypocrite when if I'm out there saying I don't believe in this product and now somebody seems to be promoting me as though I do follow that. If you follow what I mean. So you have to be careful here. There's one thing about taking a photo and saying, oh, well, I was at this event and here's a bunch of photos I took while I was at this event, or I was at this protest, I was at this street festival, took all these photos. But the point you turn around and then start trying to promote the idea, or that they are promoting something. Now, at this point, what happens is you need a model release form. Okay, so if you are going to use this picture for advertising, for promoting anything, To promote a product, to promote a political view, a religious view, or anything like that, you have to get a model release form. So you have to get a signed declaration, a signed form from them saying they are okay with you using their image for this campaign. And if you don't do that, you can be sued because of that. Okay, so to understand that, yes, you can take a photo and say I was at this street festival, and that's not a problem. But if you then turn around and take a photo that you took of that and make it seem as though they are promoting some kind of product or something that they haven't agreed to, that's where you can fall foul of it. So I hope that makes sense with that. A couple of more comments here. What have we got? VG says we can take photos here in India. Street photography is quite popular. And she likes the kids posing in a cheerful manner. Maggie says, my fear would be that entitlement of Western colonialism and the perception of others. Yes, I think the point you're making there, Maggie, is, one of the, certainly with like some of those Morocco photos is, and I see a lot of it with travel photos, is this notion of there can be this kind of looking at the exotic other. Oh, look, let's go and take a look at the poor people in funny countries. The other, Johnny Foreigner, the foreign people. They don't really count as real people. It's okay for us to gawp and stare and show photos of these funny people, right? Where is the respect in the humanity of that? It might be legal. Is it moral? Okay, I'm going to come back to this. All this kind of theme will run through. Katie believes that the laws are fairly similar in Australia, and she's agreeing that it's worth considering, agreeing with Maggie. Robert Schaefer says, this happened to me in downtown Dallas while doing some night photography. We were on a hotel's property and a security guard told us to stop or go inside for permission. He said it was okay from the sidewalk, so that's what we did. Ran out of room there. Yeah. Yes, so that kind of ties in, sounds very similar to the UK. April says this is why it's so much it's much more pleasurable taking pictures of animals, cuter and not complicated. This is true. This is why a lot of people avoid people photography and street photography. Okay, so let's move on then. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to relate to you a wee experience that I had recently about why this topic has come to the fore, why I thought about this, and why I thought actually I want to kind of raise this point and also see how other people are reacting to it and get feedback on it. And the wee story here is actually fairly recently, a few weeks ago, there was a steampunk weekend down in Kakubri, just 9 miles down the road, Susan's hometown here. And steampunk, hey, I've got a soft spot for it. I've done photo shoot for it, which I think was I talking about that one quite recently? Yes, I think just the other week, talking about the steampunk photo shoot I did. I've got a soft spot for this, and I thought, hey, that would be quite fun. Let's go down. There will be people dressed up. Put all my camera gear together, went down. And now this isn't a very big place. It's not a huge festival. It's not like the place in Whitby in North Yorkshire. Kakubri is quite a small town. This is a very new event. The first event was only last year. There was a few little events on, and there was a little marketplace. I went down, I sort of turned up, and I can all straight away see a few people dressed up and people who've taken a bit of time to do their costumes. And almost immediately, I bumped into a woman I know who I've photographed before, and she had this great costume on. She'd gone to a lot of trouble to make this costume, and she was with a friend who'd also gone to a lot of trouble to make up her costume too. So the two of them are together, they look fantastic. We're having a bit of a laugh and a smile, and I get, well, I'll tell you what, would you like me to take your photo? And then, if it works, I can send you a copy and what have you. And my friends immediately, yeah, that'd be great. Her friend was up for it. It was really crowded in this little bit of marketplace. I could see a little gap over to one side. There was a large tree. I said, look, let's go up over to by that tree where we've not got to worry about a busy background. And as we started walking over there, immediately another photographer appeared, just kind of hovering over my shoulder. And I turned around and looked at him, and he was, oh, don't mind me. I'm just going to kind of shoot away. Just don't worry. And of course, I'm being polite, and of course, legally, there's absolutely nothing I can do. So I'm fine. Okay. We get to the tree. Women line up. or start putting it in place. There's another photographer is immediately there with this other guy as well. And they're both shooting away, and completely, they obviously don't care about me. They're just out to get that shot. They don't really care about the women, except for the fact. And then they start saying, "Oh, could you look over here?" And as I'm trying to take the photo, I'm aware that I can't take a photo of the two of them without one of them busy looking at the other photographers. I didn't want to cause a scene. I'm feeling a bit deflated. When I'm photographing people, I like to have the space with these people. I'm a portrait photographer. I'm not a street photographer by nature. So I started to feel a bit deflated, a bit uncomfortable. And I thought, you know what, I'm not going to fight with this. So gave them my thanks, left, went off back into the crowd to see what was happening. As I moved into the crowd, I suddenly noticed there were photographers everywhere. I mean, the place was heaving with photographers. There were more, whilst there were plenty of people dressed up in steampunk outfits, there were more photographers than there were people in steampunk outfits. They were swarming the place. And I thought, and they were just kind of grabbing people and some people were kind of fairly up for it, but I could also start to see some people feeling slightly uncomfortable. And what I was sort of almost overwhelmed with was this sort of sense of entitlement that these photographers had. They seemed to think, oh, well, these people are dressed up in steampunk, they're fair game. Now, fine, I think, picking them off at a distance, you just have to stand there, you're watching these people walk past, photograph, but when you're kind of going up and grabbing people and asking them if they can come and stand here and stand there, it sort of started to feel wrong. Like I say, there was this sense of entitlement, and I was struggling a bit with this. And then I noticed there was a stall with a guy that I knew and I'd photographed before, and he had a little steampunk accessory bit. And so I went over to say to him, little catch up, a little bit of blether. And I said, my goodness, the amount of photographers around here, I can't believe it. And he said, I'll tell you exactly what that is. I said, what's that? He said, last year, he said, I was down here at the steampunk weekend. He said, and this guy came along from one of the larger camera clubs in the region. He said, quite by accident, sort of stumbled across this place, didn't realise it was going on, took a photo of me, and then he went back and apparently he won some camera club competition with this photo of me. He said, now what's happened is the entire camera club have all descended because they're all out here to get the photo so that they can win competitions. And the realisation at that point that everything, all these photographers about, they weren't really caring that much, not all of them, there will be exceptions, but many of them didn't really care about the people they were photoing. They were only interested in getting a photo that they could win a competition with. And this made me feel really, really uncomfortable. At this point, I still hadn't fully identified what I was feeling uncomfortable with, but I knew I wasn't feeling good about this. And then there was another stall to one side which was selling outfits, and it had this big full-length mirror. And I caught sight of myself in the mirror, this middle-aged white bloke with a big camera around his neck, with my face on it. And I realised I looked just like all these entitled photographers who were going around grabbing these people. Now, I felt I was different because I wouldn't do that. I was interested in creating a connection with the person who they might have a wonderful outfit, but I want to know about the person who's got the wonderful outfit and imbue that into my photography and make that connection. But a lot of these other people I was seeing had no interest in the person at all, other than could they get a good photo for their competition. And I found it quite upsetting, and I realised that I didn't want to be associated with these people. And actually, to be honest, I couldn't take any more photos. I just put the camera away and went home. Later on, I emailed my friend, the woman who I'd taken photos of at the beginning, and said to her, apologised for the fact, because I kind of felt like I'd left her to the jackals a little bit. And I said, look, I'm really sorry. I didn't realise I was finding it difficult having those people there. I hope you're okay. And she said, to be honest, she said it was getting a bit rough. And then one of them started asking us to kiss. She said, and at that point I said, no, I'm sorry, I can't do this anymore. And I went off. And I thought that was outrageous. And again, that sense of entitlement, that sense of, right, you're here for our enjoyment. And the thing is, I'm sure, fine, if I was out there and I dressed up in a costume and I went off to a festival or something like that, and somebody said, hey, can I take your photo? I'd probably be fine the first time. I might be okay the second time. I might be okay the third time. By the 45th time somebody's saying, can I take your photo? I'm just going to be swearing at them. I'm not wanting, because I'm not, if I'm dressing up, or if any of these people were dressing up, they were dressing up to be there at the festival. They weren't dressing up just to be a model for any random photographer that came along and decided they wanted to shove their camera in the face. So this is where I was at. This is what made me feel deeply uncomfortable. And then made me start thinking about that notion of power relationship. Where does the power lie? Where is, because some of these people as well, I could see who were being photographed. Fine, some people were being very polite and warm and friendly and, hey, can I take your photo? And, maybe a little bit of coercion or something, but it's kind of okay. But you were crossing a line into sort of bullying, harassment, and kind of pushing people into something they weren't really comfortable in doing. And I realised that this whole dynamic here, there's a power relationship. As soon as you have the camera, you've got a sense of power over other people. You can make people look great, or you can make them look ridiculous. And we know this because when we're on the receiving end of this, we get this feeling all the time. As soon as somebody brings up a camera, we start to quite often feel awkward because we don't know how they're going to portray us. And so these were all the thoughts that were kind of running through my head, and why I thought I will dedicate one of these podcasts specifically to this topic of consent and power relationships. Where does this lie? Are we fair game? Legally, we might be. But actually, who are we as photographers? Should we be essentially checking our privilege, checking our entitlement, and saying, yeah, we might be legally allowed to do this, but morally, should we? Does it really matter? A couple more comments here. I want to see, got a couple of, so Sandra says the other photographers are being rude in invading your space. John agrees with Sandra. April says, when I take pics of people, it's usually behind them. You can call me a sneaky one. I pretend I'm taking a picture of the scenery. Katie says, it's a really interesting issue, isn't it? I wonder if they're going to sell the photos. Are they treating the attendees as free models? Sandra says, these photographers sound very pushy. I wouldn't treat my candid subjects like that. And Meg says, don't be hard on yourself. You're a spectacular photographer, Dad. Thank you, Meg. I appreciate that. Katie says, reminds me of the punks in Carnaby Street in London back in the day. They would ask for money, and maybe that's right. And perhaps there is a thing there, a bit like those kids in Morocco, that. And there's another thing you quite often find, or there are places you can go where you start taking photos and people will come up in tourist areas and say, well, okay, you want my photo, you can pay me. So where was I going to go with that? I mean, one of the comments, I put up a thing on the Facebook group to ask if anybody wanted to sort of give me feedback. I didn't get a huge amount, but Nina in Guyana, she sent me a message and said, I remember attending a street performance in the Avenue of the Republic in town. There was a photographer taking pics and I didn't like the way I looked, hair, clothes, something. So I kept blocking my face with a book. And that idea then, that thought of the fact that she felt she knew she didn't want to be photographed. Okay. And what do you do if you don't want to be photographed? It's not about, necessarily trying to be awkward. What about your own sense of, well, I'm out here for the day. I'm out here to enjoy whatever. I'm not out here to be somebody else's model. So that's kind of, and then, I think Marilyn's already sent me a message to say that she thinks that in the state of Colorado, there's no, it's a state-by-state thing, but in the state of Colorado, there isn't a law saying you have to ask permission first. Okay, so a couple more comments here. Nick says, I looked into joining a photography club, but decided not to, as the attitude was we are better than the public, and a bad attitude to have. Susan says, I took some images of that steampunk event too, but I made a point of chatting to them first and trying to get some sort of rapport going. I don't often take images of people and found chatting. Actually, Susan sent me a really interesting input into this, and I'm going to come on to that in a moment. And Sandra says, I wouldn't have a problem paying to photograph someone. And Robert Schaefer says, I never really thought about it much, but that's pretty much what happens on most camera club field trips. And yes, this is it. I think it's this notion of raising awareness. I mean, I hadn't given it too much thought until I went through this event, and which is why I'm now kind of addressing it now. And I think it's one of these things that is worth being aware of. Let's talk for a moment, actually, because so Susan sent me quite a good email here. She said when I asked for people's thoughts on this, and she said, my thoughts on consent in photography. While I'm sure it has its place, maybe when wanting to take photographs of children, I'm not sure it should be considered when taking adults. So certainly, yeah, we're taking photos of kids, but even then, it's not illegal. But it does depend on then what you do with the photo afterwards. This is where I think, it sort of becomes slightly more grey area. She says, I don't often take images of people. They move and often don't take direction very well, as I find if you ask for permission, they tend to assume rather stuck-on smiles and poses, which is something I rarely want. And that's a good point. I mean, so what do you do if you want to get round? You ask somebody, can I take your photo? And immediately they go into their photo pose, that well-rehearsed pose we all have. And why do we have that pose? Why do we have our photo face? And largely it's because photography tends to be something that's been inflicted on us regardless of how we felt about it since quite a young age. From the earliest time, we're told to smile for the camera. Whether you want your photo taken or not, maybe one of your parents or your uncle or somebody's going to take a photo of you. These days, with these things, and the entire youth thing of everybody's got one of these and they're taking photos of each other all the time, that sense of vulnerability, when somebody takes our photo, if we're blinking, we can look really strange. If we're in the middle of saying something, our mouth can look funny. We could be, so we could be kind of in that fraction of a second going, and they go click, and suddenly that Facebook goes up on that picture goes up on Facebook. 500 other people might see this image. And it's not how we feel we would like to be represented. We feel like something has been stolen from us. Our image has been taken and used in a way that we wouldn't want it to. So we feel like we are a victim of the photography. And so the smile for the camera, the gurning for the camera, the photography face that we put on, very often has just become something that it's an instant mask because we don't want to have another one of these photos taken where we feel completely out of control of the situation. Now, some people try and get round this. I'm going to tangent just a little bit for a moment and talk about Bruce Gilden. So for anybody who's well versed in photography, you will know the name Bruce Gilden, a very, very well known street photographer, American street photographer. For anybody who hasn't come across him, you can look him up, Bruce Gilden, Gilden, easily found. Now, the thing about Bruce Gilden is one of his standard kind of almost signature things is he would walk the streets, camera in one hand, maybe flash in the other, and he would just, as he's walking past, he would suddenly shove the camera right in your face, go click, and then move straight off into the crowd again, before you've had a chance to really realise what's happened. And this guy has won all sorts of awards, global awards, European awards, American awards as being this amazing photographer. He has, his book's full of pictures where what he's done is he's grabbed the immediate reaction of somebody having a camera shoved in their face. So some people are looking shocked, some people are looking surprised, some people are looking angry. And his thing is, I'm allowed to do this, I'm getting a real reaction rather than a posed face. Other people have gone against the idea of what he's doing, feeling that he's being incredibly invasive, he's being harassing, he has no respect for any of the people that he's photographing. And absolutely, it's perfectly true. He clearly doesn't have any respect for the person. If you had respect for somebody, you wouldn't just ram your camera straight into their face with no permission, no asking, go click and then walk off. That isn't the sign of somebody who respects anybody. But there is, because he is so famous and because his technique is so well known, he has spawned 10,000 wannabes who have also done this. And there's a whole kind of genre of street photography that does this. This idea then, as street photography, that anybody who's out there is fair game, is pervasive in street photography. So I'll put glasses down. See a couple of, where are we? Sandra says, I prefer to take candid rather than posed photos as they're more natural, better representation of the person. And Nick says, but then do we use it's documentary photography? And Sandra thinks that he's being rude. Yeah, there's documentary photography. There's documenting what's going on. And I think at that point, if you're, again, like at a street, general thing, and you're taking photos of people going around their everyday business, that's documentary photography. I think shoving a camera in somebody's face isn't documentary photography. I think talking to somebody and going, oh, do you mind if I take your photo? I like the way your hat is. That's interesting. Tell me, what are you doing here? Would you like me to send you this photo? Let me go click. Do you like this? That's respectful photography. Come here. Let me get your photo. Click. Thanks. Bye. That isn't. And of course, there's the bits in between. Nadia says, I haven't given it much thought, but this is a very interesting subject and now making me think. I tend to stand in the background and pick things out that catch my attention, a bit more candid. Robert Schaefer says, makes me glad that I'm ugly. No one wants to take my picture, lol. Don't you believe it? Ugly faces are far more interesting than plain ones. Not that I'm saying, I have no idea what you look like, Robert, so I'm not making... Not making any personal judgments, sorry. Katie says, gosh, they are confronting, aren't they? Right, okay. So to carry on this, so that was a little aside about Bruce Gilden and where photography what I tend to feel is like the extreme end of photography, of the absolute disrespect for anybody you're photographing. So Susan goes on to say, I did a street photography day with fellow photographers. Funny enough, in Castle Douglas, I found a real mixed bag of models, from no thanks to how do you want me? And I think that was very similar to what I was showing back at the beginning. When I was walking around the festivals, I pull out the camera and then suddenly you get people who say, hey, take a photo of me, and yay, let's pose and let's have fun. And other people who just, no thanks. Interestingly, most of the group found it really difficult to ask people if they minded having their photos taken. And I understand that, because I'm one of those people who would find it very difficult to go up to a complete stranger and say, do you mind having your photo taken? I found it very easy to go and talk to this woman at the Steampunk Festival because I already knew her, already had a relationship with her. So that notion of going up to strangers, there's a feeling of I'm imposing here. Now, that's not to say that I'm necessarily right. They might be quite happy about it. I do tend to be slightly more reticent about it. But Susan says, I tend to brazen it out and let them think I'm a proper photographer who knows what they're doing. The best images I got were for random shots of people going about their everyday business without asking for permission. I make a point of showing the images to these people, and they're usually quite happy. At the recent steampunk event, one we were just talking about in Kakubri, I found people only too willing to have their photographs taken. And I think that will probably then come down to your particular attitude, Susan, that you are, as you said earlier, you will take the time to get to know them and talk to them. And I think there's nothing wrong with that. And you would have been respectful if they turned around and said, actually, I'm not that interested, or I don't want to, thank you. You would have let them go. She says, but they're exhibitionists by nature and will often give you business cards to send images to. Slightly broad sweeping statement. I would challenge the idea. Some of them, yes, if you've dressed up in a costume, yes, fine, you're going to know people are going to look at you. But there are some people who are not they're not exhibitionists, but they'd like to dress up. But it's also to understand that there are also an awful lot of real introverts and shy people who like to dress up, because in essence they are hiding behind the character. Back in the punk days punk days of Carnaby Street that Katie was talking about, or even, even to a lot of there were certain people I knew who had big mohawks or dramatic piercings and eye makeup and all the rest of it. And actually, they were the shyest, most nervous, anxiety-ridden people I ever knew. And this was scary makeup, essentially, to frighten people off, to prevent people from interacting with them. They wanted to show this have this aggressive outward appearance so that people wouldn't talk to them. Okay? There are plenty of actors, well-known, globally respected, Oscar-winning actors who are shy introverts, who they can act because they project a character, and that character acts as a mask and a defense for how they feel on the inside. So just because somebody actually projects outwardly something quite bold, something quite eye-catching, doesn't necessarily mean that on the inside they feel perfectly confident with it. It may well be the opposite. Not to say all cases are like that, just to I think it's worth being aware of the fact that for some people that is the case, and you might have to tread a little bit more carefully. Where else do we go? So now Susan goes on to say, where were we? The photographer may wish to use the image to put on social media. Has consent been given to do that? Should we explain to the person being photographed that we wish to publicise the image? These days, we're all aware of data protection. Do we breach that in any way by not seeking consent? Well, I think at this point, there is that notion of, like I said, if it's just going on Facebook or your social media, but it's saying, hey, there was this event going on and it was a public event and what have you, I don't think anybody's worrying about it because you're just saying this person was here at that time. Where the problem becomes is if you seem to be implying that they are promoting something they're not. There can be another area, and I was earlier in this year, I was doing a set of photographs of a series of events for a company. And essentially, while these events were going on, I was given free rein I was being employed to take photos of the events happening, of people doing things, interacting with each other, interacting with, doing the stuff they were doing, basically, from, wide shots of a room full of people through to hand shots of, getting messy with bits and pieces. But at the beginning, everybody was told there was going to be a photographer there. And I was told, and they were also told very clearly, that if they had any objection to being in any photo for any reason, then they should come and talk to me and make it known to me and or other key members of staff, who they would then come and let me know. And on a couple of occasions, there were cases where, so for example, in one place, there was a woman who had 3 children. These three children were being fostered because of domestic problems and everything else. It was incredibly important that their images did not appear anywhere public. Once I knew that, it meant that as I was taking photographs, I avoided taking photographs where they would be in them. When it turned out, and I was sitting at the computer later on, going through the photos, and I realised they'd been in the background, I hadn't noticed, I didn't use those photos. Or if there was an amazing photo that was just absolutely perfect for everything I needed, except for the fact that one of these children happened to be in one corner, then I could crop them out, disguise them, remove them, or whatever. But that piece of knowledge was extraordinarily important, that there are some times when, there's a protection level here. Now, on a public space, it's maybe not quite so obvious to do that. But it is something worth keeping in mind. Where are we? April says, if you ask someone permission to photo, it will ruin the essence of the picture. Random is much better. Well, it kind of depends on the picture you're going for. Sometimes there is a whole notion of street photography whereby you are interacting with the person and the person knows you're interacting with them and you're taking street portraits. And that's really street portraits. Street photography, which isn't about portraits, is about capturing people as they're kind of going about. Susan says, good point about exhibitionists, Kim, you're absolutely right. There are indeed different types of people doing similar things. And Janet says, sometimes they're just too far away. Okay, so hopefully then that kind of gives you a sense of what's really going on, of why I came to this and some of the different issues that are kind of coming around this. So what can we do about it? What's the point that I really want to try and get across here is that notion of, to come back to, we talked about consent, but there is this power relationship. What is this power relationship and how, and can you get past it? Because to go back to the notion of both Susan and April talking about the problem when you turn around to people and say, can I take your photo? They just kind of stick on a face or whatever. It's a defensive mechanism for a lot of people. It's, what do we do if we want to take photos of people and they don't really want to have their photo taken? And it's about this power relationship. And actually, that problem of taking photos of people who maybe have even given me permission to take their photo, but don't want me to take that photo, is something I deal with on almost every job that I do. As a portrait photographer, most people do not like having their photo taken. And part of that comes because of all the abuse they've suffered over the years of people taking photos of them, taking images of them that they didn't like, and then showing them to other people, and they feel diminished and victimized by the process of being photographed by other people. So now they feel defensive. Now they come to me because they need a photo for their social media, for their LinkedIn business profile, for their Tinder profile, for their book cover, for whatever it is. They need a professional headshot. But so they know they need that, but they hate having their photo taken. And they don't want a photo of just them looking really awkward in front of the camera. So a huge part of what I do is about re-equalizing the power relationship. I allow them to become collaborators in the photo experience. So it's not just me taking their photo, it's we are going to work together to create a photo that you would like. And that doesn't happen just because you say it. I then have to go through several steps. So one of the things, for example, that I do is very often I tether the camera to a laptop or a tablet. So when I go click, the picture immediately appears there and they can see the picture that has been taken. Now they can see the picture. They'll most often usually go, "Oh, that terrible thing, I hate that." And you go, "Well, okay, look what happens if I move the light. Look what happens if you tilt your head. Look what happens if I give you this direction, that direction." And they start to see that what they do has an effect on how they appear on the screen. So I start to train them as to how the camera responds to them and therefore how they can respond to the camera. And over time, I mean, for some people, it's maybe only 10 photos. For some people, it's 110 photos. But there comes a point where most people then start to relax. They start to realize that I'm on their side, that I'm not inflicting something on them, but what I'm actually doing is working with them together to get something. And there's a bit that at some point along the line, there's suddenly that little bit of defensive part of that fight or flight part of the brain switches off. And they go, "Oh, okay," and they relax. And once they relax, now I start to get authentic photos. Now I start to get good photos. Those first 10 or 110 photos are never going to get used, but they're a necessary step to get to the point whereby the photos are now going to be interesting, authentic, and good to look at. Not just looking at somebody who's sort of staring kind of worriedly at the camera. So equalizing the power relationship is a key aspect of this. Now, the first level of that is respect. The first level of that is respecting the person that you are photographing. Understand that they are a human being who doesn't necessarily want to have their photo taken and that you don't necessarily have any moral right to just shove your camera in their face. So that level of equal respect, I think, is a huge part of it. Now, when you're out on the street, you might not have time to do that, but offering to show them the photo. Say, "Do you mind if I take a photo?" Click, click. "What do you think?" Give them the option to say, "Oh, I don't like that. Could you delete that?" "Yeah, sure. Delete it." Do you really want to hang on to a photo that somebody else just absolutely hates of themselves? If you are only holding on to it because you think you can win a camera club competition, I don't know how much that's actually saying about us when we have that kind of attitude. So I can see Katie's writing a bit here, and I want to kind of see what she's saying. Nick says, "Respect others is always a good place to start." Absolutely. Katie says, "It's really good to think about all these issues. Copyright comes into it too. Long story, when my partner back in the day was part of a Viking reenactment society, a photography club invited them. Montsalvat, it's a medieval style artist colony there. Reenactors posed in front of these beautiful buildings. The reenactors was then sent copies of the photos for free, but if they wanted copies, they needed to pay. Okay, they are beautiful images. It becomes interesting. It becomes an interesting power relationship. The venue charges the photographers for photographs of their building. The photographer charges for copies. If you hire a photography model, they charge a lot. Fair enough too. It's a different issue perhaps, but interesting too. The models didn't get paid as much, but they did receive something for their work. I guess their work and their rights were acknowledged." Okay, there's an interesting thing here. Let's detour a little bit onto this about the relationship between photographers and models. There are certain sites online where you have the Purple Port is one, Mad Cow one. No, it's not Mad Cow. I can't remember. There's another one, Model Folio, I think, where You have models who put up portfolios of their work and say, hey, I'm available for hire. You have photographers who put up portfolios of the work and say, hey, I'm available for hire. And what you tend to find is, you see, you could be a brilliant model, but if you're starting out and you've only got bad photos of you, nobody's going to want to hire you because they can't see what you're capable of. So at this point, if you want to get a good photographer, you may have to pay the photographer to get good photos of you as a model. If you're a good photographer, but if you're a starting out photographer and you don't have any decent pictures that you can take of models to show that you can do it, then maybe you need to get a good model who really knows what they're doing, who knows how to play in front of the camera, you aren't going to have to spend 110 photos taking images of just to kind of get them relaxed. They can be there immediately and they can make you look good. Really good models also tend to know a lot about photography, so they can help you with your lighting and the posing and the angles and the composition and everything like that. And these people are worth money, so you pay them. The in-between bit is quite often what you find is what's known as time for prints, or an exchange, whereby sometimes a photographer needs a model, the model needs photos, and what you do is you set up an exchange so that the photographer and the model come together. The photographer takes the photos, lets the model have copies of the photos, but nobody's charging anybody any money. But generally speaking, if you are hiring somebody to take photos and you're wanting to then use those photos to promote things, then at that point you need a model release form as well, which models, because you'll be paying them for it, tend to be quite happy to sign. So there's that's a dynamic too. Is, who's paying for who? Is the model paying for the photographer? Is the photographer paying for the model? Are they doing a mutual exchange? I've done plenty of shoots before now where I've had models, hairdresser, makeup artist, stylist, and nobody's got paid except for the fact that everybody's had access to the photographs. I've wanted to be able to do a big shoot and I've needed a big portfolio piece, but also the makeup artist needs good photos showing off how good she can do the makeup. The hairdressers need a good photo showing off how good he can do the hairdressing. The stylist is wanting the clothes to look good. And I've then got access to a much larger team than I normally would, and I haven't had to pay for them. So I allow everybody else to have access to the photos. And then the key bit here is when we put the photos out on social media, whenever we use them, everybody credits everybody else. Thanks to this person for the hairdressing, this person for the makeup, this person for the clothing, this place, this venue for allowing us to use it, whatever else is needed. So there's that side of things. So, okay. So to go back then, just briefly to that notion then of the respect and the equalization of power. That if you truly respect the person you are photographing, you allow them the same kind of power relationship. Okay, so if you photograph someone, you allow them, if they don't like the photo, you will delete it or not use it. What I want you to think about here is that thing about being on the receiving end. I mean, for example, Susan, I know well from conversations we've had. I mean, you've said about the fact that you can find it within you to go up to people and ask to take their photos, but you hate having your photo taken yourself. If somebody comes up to you and says, hey, Susan, let's take your photo, you'd be the first one to say, no, I'm really not comfortable with that. Or to, like Nina, hide behind a book if you saw somebody else walking around with a camera. And most of us are like that. That's not a criticism of you. That's what most of us are like. So really, I think the bottom line with this is when we're out taking photographs of people and the way we are, our attitude towards other people is how would we feel if we were on the receiving end of it? What would we feel if somebody was pointing the camera at us? Or, even if we wouldn't care, how would we feel if the attitude of the photographer was taking a photo of our mother, our sister, our child? How would we feel if they were sort of just shoving a camera in? How would I feel if they shoved a camera into my 87-year-old mother's face and went click, and with no respect for her? How would I feel? I'd feel mad. I'd feel really angry. So should I be doing that myself? And that, I think, is really the ultimate bottom line with this, is about this understanding. And it's the notion of you know, sometimes we talk about the object of our photography, sometimes we talk about the subject of our photography. But I think when it comes to people, we should always be thinking of subject, not object. And too often, and to go back to, I think, Robert Schaefer mentioned earlier, or one of the Roberts, about that notion with camera clubs, there's very often this, you have to be careful, not all camera clubs, obviously, but there can be this thing, there's this history of street photography, which is like street photography as wildlife photography. Like you're picking out people like you're shooting squirrels or geese or something like that. And maybe if you're out there and you're just photographing people, that's okay. But if you're photographing vulnerable people, there's a whole sense of homelessness that always gets me feeling uncomfortable, where people are happy to shoot a homeless person sitting on the street, of beggars and what have you. And there's this idea that, oh, well, it's okay. And what I'm doing, oh, well, I'm showing the plight of the homelessness. No, you're not. You're out there just trying to get an interesting photo for your camera club, and that's not the same thing. Did you take that person for a meal? Did you give them some money to help them through a hard time? Now, if you did that and chatted with them and spent time with them, and then they were happy for you to take their photograph, then fine, you have my respect. But if you stood across the road, took a photo of the homeless person, then you don't. Because that's not about respect. That's about treating somebody as object, not subject. But event photography, festivals, things like that, you're out there, you're shooting around, no problem with that. But I think it's about understanding the notion of, are you looking to make people look good? Are you out to make people look interesting? Are you out to record the event? Or are you out to kind of laugh at that person? And I see a little bit too much of that. And that sense of the entitlement of, I've got the camera, I'm a photographer, it's okay, you're fair game, I think is something we just have to be very, very careful about. And my own experiences of actually where I've crossed the line and done that and treated someone, like some of those shots that I took in Morocco, where I just felt, oh great, exotic other, I'll fire off the photos. And I wasn't necessarily thinking about whether these people wanted to be photographed until somebody actually very clearly made it clear that they didn't want to be photographed. And that made me pause and go, actually, how much right do I have to do this? So this is it's about raising awareness. Everybody, each of you is going to have your own different lines about where you're going to draw and say, okay, this is acceptable, this isn't, and here's the fuzzy grey bit in between. But I think if we can go into this with a better understanding of what it is we're doing, of this kind of the moral grey ground, then we're all much the wiser and better photographers because of it. So what Katie says, it's nice if there's an exchange for artwork, totally different to street photography, where the model isn't acknowledged. April says, yes, exchange of artwork for artwork is fun and relaxing, void of issues. Okay, so with that in mind then, so that's kind of really what I wanted to talk about. What I am going to do is Sandra, I'll just finish off with a couple of things here, because Sandra actually sent me a couple of photos from Pride Festival that she'd been photographing, wanting a little bit of feedback. And it ties in quite nicely with what we're doing here. So I'll move on to that. Just a little reminder here that if you find these podcasts useful, interesting, entertaining even, then buymeacoffee.com/Kim Ayres is one of the ways you can support these podcasts. Another thing to do, of course, if you haven't done it already, do like this as it's going out, and click subscribe if you haven't done already, and hit the notification bell, all these kind of things, because certainly when you hit the like and acknowledge that you're to YouTube that you're watching this, then it helps the algorithm somewhat. Okay, so what I want to do now then is I'm going to just bring up a couple of photos that Sandra sent me, and so let's show you this one. And where are we? This one. Okay, so we've got a couple of photos from Pride. So Sandra says, where are we? It was an interesting point you raised about photographers' sense of entitlement to photograph. As you know, I do quite a bit of candid street photography, usually of parades and sometimes protests. I'm always trying to accurately capture the mood of the event and to take photos that the subject would like. I would never attempt to make anyone look silly or stupid. In my experience, most people at these events don't mind being photographed. In fact, I find mostly they like the attention. In some cases, will ask to be photographed. Although occasionally some people don't like being photographed, but this is quite rare. So yeah, I think there is that point that it's very similar to the point I made at the festivals, that sometimes, you know, you've got a camera, people actually actively pose in front of you. They want the fun of it. by and large, there's people about, nobody's really objecting too much. So, a couple of little bits of feedback then on the photo. So here we've got one. Is this, you know, your first photo here? A lot of fun. Drawn on moustache and beard. Big bright smiley face. In terms of feedback, if we just briefly open this in Photoshop, the main thing, the problem that you've got here, as always with the problem in it, I mean, great, the subject looks fantastic. Absolutely engaged with the camera. The biggest problem tends to be the background. Now, I can't remember what settings you had on the camera here, but whilst the background is out of focus, not all of it's completely out of focus. There are things like this strip of orange on whatever happens to be held behind this person's head is really kind of grabbing the attention somewhat. The other thing I would say is, nearly always with portraits, one of the things that really brings a face to life is catch lights. And if we zoom in, there are catch lights, but they're quite dull. So in terms of editing, what would we do here? I think, so the three things that I would probably do, I'll just duplicate that layer for a moment. Actually, let's just change the workspace over to here so you can see what I'm doing on the right. I think what I would probably like to do is I would come in and maybe highlight these catch lights. So if I get the dodge tool, I've got this on a exposure of 6, but actually I will take that up to something like 16 or something. And I'm just going to rub over these highlights a little bit more here so that they stand out a bit more. Over in this eye as well. Because I think it is one of those things that if you show eyes without highlights, they tend to look a bit dead. We're so used to the idea. So in a still image, so if we look at that face, I don't know how well it's showing up on your device, but if I turn it off, turn it on, it looks, you can see that there's more light in the eyes, which actually creates more life in the eyes. Now, you might want to kind of settle it down a bit in places. Maybe I've done that pink a little bit too strong, reflection, but interesting. Quite possible there, that pink, is that you in the reflection there, Sandra? Were you wearing a pink jacket, or is that just somebody standing off to one side? The second part of this is this orange part here, which feels really quite loud, and maybe just toning that down somewhat. If we go to hue saturation, and then what I'll do is if I select yellows, or it could be reds, but what I'll do is they don't have an orange slider here, so I'll take the little picker down on the left here, and I'll select that colour. So that's giving me specifically that colour. Now if I hit desaturate, now it's tending to desaturate quite a lot, so I'm going to take that down. This mask here I'm going to fill with black so that none of it's there. Then I turn my brush to white, and I just paint back in this. Okay, just a little bit back here. Now I'm catching bits out here, and don't want to actually lose this person's hair here, so that'll come back in a little bit. But even something like that in itself has taken away the attention that's kind of grabbing. So whether you do a color shift, you shift it to brown, or you shift it to a slightly different color, but you certainly take down the intensity of that orange, stops the grab once more. Now, the other thing I would do is if I just select all, copy, paste, so putting that into a, merging that together, and is the background here, if I go, I'll just filter camera raw for a moment. I'm going to vignette. Now, interestingly with vignettes, generally speaking with vignettes, what you do is, more often than not, you darken the outer edges, and darkening the outer edges brings more attention to the inside. But because this person has darker skin, everything's getting a bit dark, and actually what you want is a lighter background. So if you take the vignette out and actually lighten the background a bit more, then actually this person stands out better. So understanding whether you see that it actually draws more attention back into the center by lightening the outside than it does on the now if I what if I was to do that again? That's maybe overkill at that point if I double do it, but that's one way of playing with it. And then another thing we can do is maybe just bring those curves up just a fraction more, just play around, just because we want to be able to see that wonderful expression on the face. So that's the key things I would possibly do with that one, Sandra, is you're wanting to get the eyes, you're wanting to kind of take away as many distracting elements. Again, similar, I mean, that green on the trousers here, I must admit, perhaps I would maybe tone those down a fraction. You don't want to go too far, because actually the pride is all about the colour. But you don't, if the photo is about this person, you're not necessarily wanting everything to kind of pull the eye away. So that's what I would kind of figure to do with that one. Now, where were we? Sandra says, interesting, I thought I'd lightened up the eyes quite a bit, but maybe I should do a bit more. And you weren't sure quite what to do about the fan. Okay, the other thing then, the other photo we had, and I won't spend too long with this, but when I was looking at this one, really full, colourful, bright photo, like this a lot. Lots of colour, and we've got this this person's face here. Let's open this with Photoshop. What I felt was really drawing its attention to. So we've got this woman's face here, but I also, right next to her is this other one with doing the selfie, which is really quite fun as well. And I think the real narrative in this is the contrast between these two. The way the arm comes up here is lovely. The way she's looking directly at the camera, again, lovely. We don't want to get rid of the rest of it. But so now, in the background also, everything's got a slight tilt. If we look at the verticals, they are all tilting off to the left slightly. So I would just straighten that a little bit. It's not going to be completely straight because there's a wide angle lens you've got. But let's go back to just background here. And so I'm going to do that. I'm going to be careful here. Don't want to lose the hand, but I maybe don't need quite as much in the background. And in fact, actually, you know what? I think there's something to be had here about the idea of a cinematic crop. I think if we do start doing something like this, then what we do is, I think that's quite a fun crop. Now what we've got is we've got much more attention. We can still see there's enough background to know what's going on, but we've got a bit more attention on here. Now, again, I would be tempted to lighten the catch lights in the eyes, just to kind of, again, I mean, I'm doing this very, very quickly. I would take probably a little bit more, slightly overdone the whites there. But a little bit of catch light, I think, helps lift the picture. And maybe at this point, what if I go to the levels? You know, that's quite a lot. There's the whites in there are kind of making it level out, but the whole thing feels a bit dark. Actually, rather than levels, I think I will go curves. I'm going to pull the curves up a little bit. Actually, maybe that's just softening it a bit too much. Let's take this into Camera Raw filter. And if I hit auto, that's not really done as much as I want. So I'm going to bring this, I'm going to bring the whole exposure up a bit, but I'm then going to bring the highlights back down a little so that we're not getting the highlights blown too much. I think maybe we can go a little bit of vignette, darker, lighter. I think maybe go to slightly darker on this one, just kind of bring those edges in. Then I might be tempted to add just a little bit more contrast, just kind of really, and that kind of really boldens up the colours somewhat as well, and then affects potentially a little bit of clarity. I'm not totally sure about that, maybe only a touch. Something like that, I think, and immediately you can see lifts it somewhat. Now, again, I think what would have been quite good would have been if there'd been a little bit more of a blurred background. Now, to insert a blurred background is going to be really difficult with something like this. I think even Photoshop's amazing algorithms isn't really necessarily going to be able to pick out where the edge lines are because there's so much busyness around the place. But that, I think, is really where I would go with this one, Sandra, is that cinematic crop, I think, works particularly well. You now really feel almost like you're in the movie of the parade. And we've managed to kind of just create a bit more of a balance. So she's slightly left of centre. This one's kind of slightly right or more in the centre, but the arm is coming up. I might play around and sort of darken areas and lighten areas just to actually make a little bit more of So, okay, let me just show you briefly what I mean here. So if I take the curves and I drop that down a little bit like that. Now I'm going to fill that back in so that's not really showing. Then I'm going to paint in something like this, darken down this area a little bit. But what I also want to do though is I'm going to reverse back in and paint back in the hand and the phone and the rainbow bracelet. So what we've done there then is you can see we kind of darkened but kept the arm. And so this is allowing this part here to show up a little bit more where it maybe gets a little bit lost. So there's little things you can do and play around with that. And again, it's coming back to understanding what the narrative is, where you've decided, which part of the photos you've decided the most important, and what you can do to enhance those. Hopefully that gives you a couple of ideas there, Sandra. Right, okay, what have we said? Oh, Sandra says, I wouldn't have thought of the cinematic prop for this photo, but I do like it now that you've done it. Excellent. Right, okay. So that pretty much brings us to the end of this. I hope you found this interesting. If you come up with more thoughts, put them in the Facebook group, email me, but also this video here. If you happen to come back to this video, or if you happen to be watching this version of the podcast, you weren't watching it live, I think there's room for us to actually have a little bit of debate into the comments below as well. This can be an ongoing thing. People could be coming back to this. Is, you know, what level do you kind of cross over? Where's your line drawn? Where is the bit where you say this, you know, that other people, when you're out there in public, is everybody just fair game? Should you have some kind of level of respect? Does it really matter? What's the difference? Is it a very different thing? Say there's riots going on, you're following street protests. Does anybody have the right then to turn around and say, don't photograph me? There's lots of areas that I think that'll be fun to explore, but in that spirit of respect, if you do set up a debate at any time and join in it, always have the respect for other person. The biggest thing is like debate the argument with somebody, not the person. You never ever call somebody stupid or idiotic for holding an opinion different to your own. Argue the point with them, but always respect the person who's got the point. Okay. Okay, so thank you very much to everyone for sending in their images, particularly Susan for giving us a really good kind of feedback to kind of explore the ideas, and the fact that Susan was also at that steampunk weekend it kind of acted as quite a nice balance for me, I think. And also to Sandra then for sending in a couple of images to go along with it. So, and Katie, yes, so that must be, well after 1 o'clock in the morning for you. Hope you managed to settle down. Katie says, great topic. I think we could talk about this for hours. Excellent. So, yes, thank you to everybody. Now, last little mention. Next week, then, is the Minimalist Challenge. Don't forget, if you can't remember or you missed it, go and check out last week's episode 205, where I go into in depth about the idea of what minimalism. No, not minimalism. So, yes, it is minimalism. Yes. I'm getting completely lost. Whatever the topic is. Macro, not minimalism. Macro, yes. Thank you there, Susan. Macro photography. Last week I gave you lots of examples of macro photography. Minimalism was the previous month. So if you would like to take part and you haven't already go and check out that one for ideas. Send me your images. Try and get them to me by Friday, Saturday at the absolute latest, but ideally before. And next week we will take a look at how different people have approached the macro challenge, and we'll all have a bit of fun. And smug points to be handed out. So if you want to nudge your way up the Smug Points Leaderboard, then make sure you put in your images for the macro challenge. Right, okay. Look forward to seeing you all next week. Actually, what bit am I trying to press here? Take care. Have fun. Bye-bye.